Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Amy Blaymore Patterson, and I'm the Executive Director of the Connecticut Land Conservation Council. Welcome to Session 3 of the 2022 Connecticut Land Conservation Conference. I now want to acknowledge that we in Connecticut are on the traditional territory of the Mohegan, the Paugussett, the Wappinger, the Pequot, and other indigenous peoples. We take this time to acknowledge the original caretakers of the land and encourage you to spend some time getting to know their cultures and the history of the lands on which you live, hike, and enjoy. CLCC is incredibly grateful for the generosity of our 2022 sponsors who have stepped up big time to support this hybrid conference. I'd like to acknowledge our lead sponsors, Eversource Energy, the Nature Conservancy, the Trust for Public Land, Audubon Connecticut, Aquarian Water Company, Connecticut River Gateway Commission, Donosky and Associates, Karen and Fazio, the Land Trust Alliance, the Lawrence J. London Foundation, the Little Green Light, South Central Regional Water Authority, and at least 45 other organizations, including many land trusts. Thank you all for continuing to support us as we have adapted this important annual event through alternative formats over the past 2+ years. Today's roundtable discussion is entitled Creating a Welcoming Experience on the Land for All. It's one of 5 conversations organized by a committee of emerging conservation and environmental leaders who took the reins in planning and implementing the conference for us this year. Our goal was to give these young people a platform to share their opinions about the issues that drive them to take action and provide the rest of us with insights into their vision for their communities, the state, the country, and the planet. Equitable access to nature and the land was one of the topics they identified. At CLCC, we believe that creating a welcoming outdoor environment for as many people as possible will help strengthen and further our collective mission of conserving more land and building healthier communities. With support from community foundations, in particular, the Community Foundation of Eastern Connecticut and the Connecticut Community Foundation, we have focused our Regional Advancement Initiative programming on exploring the spectrum of topics around inclusive conservation and engaging a broader, more diverse population of people in land conservation, as well as engaging land trusts and community issues, other community issues across the state. Today's roundtable was born out of an email conversation initiated by Doris Johnson, the Outreach and Education Coordinator for DEEP's Environmental Justice Program. As many of you know, Doris is also a CLCC board member, among the many hats she wears professionally and personally in connecting people across the state. Doris was instrumental in connecting our young planning committee members with many of the speakers in this year's conference. Today, we are honored to be joined by a diverse group of community and government leaders, some of whom were part of Doris's email thread, and they will share their stories and perspectives on how to make the environmental and outdoor sectors more welcoming. I am delighted to turn the program over to our facilitator, Mercy Quay. I first became acquainted with Mercy through Rue Mapp, founder of Outdoor Afro, and the keynote speaker of our 2020 virtual conference. Among her many professional accomplishments, and there are many, Mercy is founder and president of the Narrative Project, which offers high-quality communications for nonprofits and other organizations seeking to do good in the world. She's a professor at Southern Connecticut State University, the vice president for communications with the Connecticut Society of Professional Journalists, and a columnist with Hearst Connecticut Media. I encourage you to read more about Mercy and our other speakers on our website and to get to know them. Please join me, everybody, in welcoming Mercy Quay and today's speakers. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me, Amy. And I'm really looking forward to talking with this group. We've got a phenomenal panel here with us today that are really going to help us parse through the issues and try to understand exactly what we can all be doing to make the outdoors a more welcoming, inviting, and accessible place for as many people as possible. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panelists. I'm going to do this one by one and in no particular order. And as I do this, each of them will give us a bit of a sense about themselves and what brings them here to this conversation today. So first we have Leticia Colon de Mejia as president of the Green Eco Warriors and appointed board member of the National Environmental Justice Advisory Council. Leticia, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me here today. I'm honored to participate in the conversation as a Latina and also as a conservationist. I really enjoy this work. Specifically, our goals at Green Eagle Warriors are to engage youth and families in the understanding of the interconnectedness between us, our choices, and the environment. Looking forward to the conversation today.
Thank you so much, Letitia. And next we have Tasha Daniels with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service.
Hi, everybody. I'm Tasha Daniels. I work for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. I've been working for the service for 14 years, and I'm really excited to be on this panel.
Thank you so much, Tasha. So next up, we have Chris Donnelly, formerly of the Connecticut DEEP, the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. Thank you for joining us, Chris.
Good afternoon, everyone. Yes, I relatively recently retired from DEP, where I was urban forestry coordinator. So actively involved in the urban forestry program for the past 20 years. I do have a forestry background, a degree in forestry. But one of the nice things about retiring is that I go back to being the kid from Bridgeport who grew up splashing in the streams near our house, or making a long 3-mile hike to what was then called 90 Acres Park. And actually, one of the best things about my position with DEP is that I got to bring forth that kid from Bridgeport as I talked to people from throughout the state about importance of trees and so on.
Thank you so much, Chris. And then we'll have Holly Lalim of the Connecticut Department of Agriculture.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I am so excited and honored to be here today. My name is Holly Lalim. I work for the Connecticut Department of Agriculture in their farmland preservation program. Before that, I worked for the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. I worked in their open space and watershed land acquisition program. Before that, I was a vegetable farmer, mostly in New England, and I will forever be a wannabe farmer.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And while I don't believe she's on the call just yet, I believe we will be having Lysandra Hairston Barton joining us, who is an environmental biologist coordinator with Arkansas's Game and Fish Commission. But as she is joining us, I will turn it to our panelists, who I'm excited to hear from today. And I know each of you will learn a great deal from each of them. So we're going to start off and kick right into the conversation. My first thing all right, a little bit about me, right? When I got married and we were standing in front of, all of our closest friends and family, my husband, who is from Wyoming, and I, who is from New Haven, born and raised and stayed, we sat in front of everyone. I wrote into my vows, everyone thinks that I introduced you to hot sauce and you introduced me to the outdoors, when that is exactly the opposite. And so I have had a long history of being appreciative of the outdoors. So I guess my question to you all will be, as a starting place, where does your connection to the outdoors, to land, to nature, and your passion for the environment stem from? Letitia, I'll go with you first for that question.
Thanks, Mercy. So I'm from Puerto Rico, and my mother's from Italy and my dad's from Puerto Rico, but my dad was really the one who connected me to nature. We were fire walking and our Taino culture. And so we spent a lot of time outdoors. He was really interested in birds, trees, fungi, and helping us understand ultimately that we were directly connected to the land that sustains us.
Fantastic. Tasha, tell me a little bit about your connection to the outdoors. What brought you to do the work you're doing today?
Well, Mercy, my mom is an avid gardener, and being outside with her and learning about pollinators and why bees are important at an early age really got me into wanting to go into the environmental field. And I had some really cool teachers in high school, and they really inspired me to go for it.
How did you go for it? How did they inspire you to go for it?
Well, I knew that there was a really good environmental science program at UMass, and I was like, I'm just going to go to UMass Amherst. Everyone calls it the backup school, but it's really not. It's one of the best universities here in Massachusetts. And I just went for it. At first, I was an environmental engineer, and I was like, this doesn't feel like me. So I went into environmental science, and I found my niche and my mothership, I should say, of people with like-minded ideas and things like that. So that's how I went for it.
I mean, and it's really exciting because I think that this enters into a conversation about careers and career choices and how folks, have to decide what they're going to do with the rest of their lives at 18. So, Chris, I think you being, recently retired, you have the vantage point of looking back and seeing how your career has traversed years and traversed interests. And tell us, what was the thing that connected you to the land and to the place and eventually had you end up at Deep?
Okay, yeah, that could be a long story. Don't necessarily go into all the stops along the way. As I mentioned, growing up as a kid, discovered the nearby Rooster River in Bridgeport, and that was kind of the place I loved to go. And it really effectively challenged my imagination. But I should also mention in that context, of course, were books, because I was an avid consumer of the Golden Books of Fish and the Golden Book of Trees and the Golden Book of Insects and all those. And so they had a lot to do with shaping me as well. And of course, at some point you grow up and you got to go to school and so when I was making my choice in college, I chose biology, and was, got very interested in how organisms work and that sort of thing. Graduated from college, had a job basically working in an engineering situation, and made the choice that no, if I have to do this work thing, I want to do it in a way that involves me working closely with nature in some one way or another. That's about the time I really started gravitating towards trees, and I've got a couple of different aspects of my background. I worked in tree care a little bit, worked in the lumber industry a little bit, got to know trees from the inside out, so to speak. But was very pleased that I was able to end up at DEP with the then just developing urban forestry program. And what I liked about that is that I got to work with so many other people that have similar interests or similar connection to nature in a variety of different ways. So in a lot of ways, I describe myself as a cheerleader working with many people throughout the state.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that. Holly, I'm interested in your path, right? I mean, you are the resident farmer on the call, and you have a line of sight into, I'm saying resident farmer because of the Department of Ag, of course, right? You have a line of sight into the way we cultivate the land here in Connecticut. Tell us what paved your path towards that work.
Sure. Thanks, Mercy. I grew up in a very rural area of Vermont. I mean, Vermont itself is rural, but I grew up in a step above, rural Vermont itself. So I was just so fortunate to have nature as part of my everyday life. My husband often teases me because he, jokes like, "Oh my gosh, did you just grow up under a rock up there in Vermont?" Because I just don't understand the 90s or 2000s cultural references. Oh, hey, this music, this song, you remember this? And I was like, no, I was, digging up worms in the backyard or something. But I became specifically interested in agriculture, vegetable production, especially about 10 years ago while I was getting my undergraduate degree. I was studying environmental science and climate change, and became particularly interested in the food system and, how the food system worked. I didn't grow up my parents didn't have a garden growing up. I just loved nature. And then I started learning about food systems and thought, oh, hey, it's the summertime, I should get a job. Maybe I'll work on a vegetable farm. That sounds cool. And I was just immediately hooked. I just loved it. It was just mind blowing to me, putting seeds or transplants in the ground and just watching, the transformation over, just sometimes even as short as a few weeks. So after that, I continued farming in New England and Hawaii for several years before beginning my state service. I just think that agriculture and nature in general is just astounding. Just, blown away by
Absolutely.
it always.
Absolutely. And later on, we'll dive into some conversations around food justice, food access, and really what it means to be able to open up, the land for the people to be able to feed themselves. But right now, I just got word that Lysandra Hairston Barton, who is the environmental biologist coordinator for Arkansas's Game and Fish Commission, has joined the call. Lysandra, please feel free to join us on here. And I would love for you to tell us a bit about you and what paved your path towards a lifelong love of the land. Say that 5 times fast.
Right. Good morning. I'm so sorry. I've been out of pocket. I graduated 2 kids in 7 days from college. So today was my first day back in the office. And of course, with that came a lot of things that need to be me getting my bearings. So my apologies for being late. I grew up in Pine Bluff, Arkansas, which in the South, in the Delta, a real rural area, always engaged in outdoors, playing outdoors. My grandfather's love for being outdoors is kind of what kind of fueled me. I started out wanting to be a biologist, got to college and did an internship on our university's fish farm. And that catapulted me into changing my major completely and majoring in fisheries biology because it gave me a great combination of being outdoors, but still having some outside doing the lab work. But that sometimes it's just being outdoors grounds you, right? So that really helped kind of solidify what I grew up doing. Grew up going fishing with my mom and dad, grew up being outdoors. And so that love for the outdoors grew from me doing my undergraduate work and graduate work at the University of Arkansas at Pine Bluff. And that progressed me on, gave me a platform to expand into my environmental work. So I worked for 8 years with the Department of Environmental Quality doing water sampling, making sure that we have baselines and parameters for doing our water quality work in the event of a disaster. And then doing that work just kind of worked its way in where I started doing permits and reviewing projects. And so now Game and Fish has snapped me up because of my background in that. So for 4 years, I've been doing just the environmental permitting program for Arkansas Game and Fish Commission. So, but it also, being with the Game and Fish Commission gives me, again, that opportunity to engage in the outdoors, but it gives me a bigger platform to engage more girls, women of color, children of color in our platform and engaging them in the outdoors. There's so many in our urban areas that are not engaged or exposed to fishing or archery and all the things that Game and Fish embodies and offers to our state, as we're known as the natural state. So my goal has always been, and my motivations now more so, is to engage and get more youth involved in our outdoor activities. And so me being a face that they feel comfortable with has really just made a world of difference, but it brings me a lot of joy. So I do this job not because of the pay, but definitely because I'm happy doing what I do. So.
I mean, it really is just a fantastic point that you made, and one that I think that actually leads us to this conversation about access, right? One thing that all of us have already talked about in our introductions about what brought us to this place and even this conversation was the varying levels of access growing up. Chris, I love you talking about the access to nature while growing up in Bridgeport and knowing what urban access to nature can look like. And Tasha, you talked a bit about, right, not even quite understanding how you could break away into it, but then your teachers pushing you in that direction, telling you to go for it. So I think from each of your perspectives, can you give me a sense of, from your seat, from what you see, from your vantage point, what are the barriers to access, right, in the environmental space, accessing natural spaces? And one of the biggest questions that I am interested in is, what can we be doing to increase access? But one question at a time. I have this issue where I ask a million questions to dive into the conversation. So what is the biggest, and Chris, I'll start with you. What has been the biggest barrier to equitable access in nature that you've seen in your career?
Yeah, I'm thinking of it the other way around. One of the biggest helps has been mentoring. I think it's very helpful to people in general, whoever you are, when you find yourself out in the middle of the woods for the first time, to be there with somebody, and particularly somebody who knows what they're doing and can pass that information along to you, so that one feels much more comfortable.
Right.
So I suppose the other side of that would be lack of access to mentoring, to people that can provide that bridge, provide that access, that initial introduction to nature.
Tasha, you said a little bit about that mentoring aspect. Is that one of the barriers that you've seen, and what are some of the others? You're muted.
Sorry about that. So yes, mentoring has been a barrier for that I've seen in the past, and still today in some aspects of that. So can you say the question one more time? Sorry, I'm getting nervous.
No worries at all. So I'm interested in, from your perspective, what has been some of the biggest barriers to access, to equitable access to nature and the outdoors?
Well, for me, I think one of the biggest barriers for me was, having the proper equipment. Like when people invite you to go camping and things like that, your parents are like, you need a what? A tent? And you need the proper shoes and the proper, clothing. And for me, when I was invited on camping trips with my friends, that was like a barrier for me. And that was the money aspect. Another barrier for me for getting into nature, I think, was like environmental education, not having a lot of it during elementary school, and understanding why nature was important and things like that. So as an environmental educator, I go to different schools and museums, and it feels really good to go out there and teach the young children about nature.
Please, Letitia.
I'm going to follow on. Tasha, thank you so much for your transparency in relationship to the barriers that lack of financial resources can cause some communities, right? And in families. I was going to say the same exact thing in relationship to the youth that I work with. Oftentimes the lack of exposure is what's the problem. So they haven't been exposed because their parents don't own a car. There aren't a lot of parks or outdoor spaces that are safe in the communities they live in, because there's also a safety factor. If you're walking in the woods and it's a community that has things going on that are unsafe, and you're not feeling protected by the police or in your community, then you're not going to walk alone, for example, in the park. You're not going to let your kid go to the park to play by themselves. If there are shootings or things happening in your community, again, you're not going to let your child go run and play outside. The other thing is the exclusion of equipment. Lots of times kids come to our camp and we actually keep lots of extra equipment for that very reason. We have extra boots, we have extra clothes, because they may also not want to get dirty. Sometimes they're wearing things that their parents have worked very hard, 1 or 2 jobs to buy for them, so that they can feel comfortable at school and in their community having the right shoes or clothes. But then when they go outside to work in the garden area, they're really worried about wrecking up those things their parents worked hard for. So we saw kids kind of taking plastic bags and tying them around their sneakers. And that's what gave us the idea to provide boots on site for kids to use. And then the last thing that you brought up, which I thought was very critical for folks to understand, because lack of information or access to information goes both ways, right? So communities who have access to science in grade school, they don't understand that in communities where we live, like Title I school communities in Connecticut, if there's more than 50% kids of color, they're not offering contextualized science until they reach high school. So if the first time you're learning about the interconnectedness of the water cycle or respiration to plants or climate change, all of these issues, then it's kind of late. You've already kind of formulated who you are as a person. By the time you're in high school, you might have some aspirations, and you've missed out on that early exposure, which would give you that love, which most of us have expressed here, for being in nature or working in farming, or even not being afraid of pollinators, not afraid of worms, not afraid of the dirt. Or maybe sometimes kids will come to our camp and they're really terrified of ticks. They've heard stories or something, so they're afraid to go outside. And these are, in my opinion, just lack of exposure, which leads to fear both ways, on both sides of the street, because lack of understanding can lead to fear of us being in the community as well.
Thanks for that. And Holly and Lizandra, I would love to hear your addition to this, because something Letitia just brought up that I think is fantastic is, right, there's this access gap, this nature gap that happens. If you don't have an entry point when you're young, then you are sort of forced into self-advocating when you're older, right? And one thing I would love to hear you two talk about is what's going on for adults, right? Where do we end up catching adults' attention to have them find a connection to nature as well?
So I can speak for state of Arkansas. We do have programs that engage, right? Our education division has a program called BOW, which is Becoming an Outdoors Woman. So that's great. Concept, fabulous. But we still have a little bit of a hiccup or a stump or hurdle. And that is women of color being present in those learning experiences, because the opportunities are out there. But I brought up to my agency, I said, as an employee, I didn't even know that was an opportunity to get, like I didn't hear about it. I heard about it from my old coworkers at my old job who had gotten a group together to attend the event. I was like, wait, but I work here now. Like, how did I not know this? So what I've tried to be vocal about, because again, the engagement, the community outreach technically is not in my job description at all. I'm an environmental permitting person. I deal with legal stuff. But I saw that gap and I'm like, I work here now. So I want to learn those things. Because as a woman of color, there were a lot of things that I didn't get exposed to. I got exposed to fishing because my family did. But what I look at now is in our elementary schools. In the city, our home base is the capital city, which is Little Rock, and we have one of the largest school districts in the state, but we don't have a presence in our urban schools. Now in our rural schools, we have great access to these programs. And why? Because these kids have been raised to hunt and fish and be in the outdoors and farming. Their engagement with the land and their interaction with the land is just innate because it's what they're raised around. But our kids in our urban areas in the cities aren't getting that. And so I've tried to be a little more vocal in saying, hey, we need to engage these schools because the mentoring part is beneficial. We said, like Leticia said, well, they're not getting it till they get to high school. Well, we do actually have some schools that are trying to do gardens. So that's one way of getting those kids involved in elementary school. We do and that's through our magnet schools. We have that engagement, but there are a lot of, in our lower income areas, they're not getting that. So there is a gap, and that gap it's there because we have people who, the other barrier is we have non-people of color who don't know how to communicate with people of color, and they feel uncomfortable. And so when I'm uncomfortable, I don't go to an area that makes me uncomfortable. I don't work in areas that make me uncomfortable. And that is a big barrier in the South, at least in my area, I see. And I've heard from colleagues, well, I don't know how to communicate. Well, I mean, we're all human and our communication is simple. Just talk to me like you would talk to the next person. But that is also a barrier that I'm finding that we're trying to figure out how to address and how to deal with. And luckily, I have an agency that's starting to listen to what we're saying, because there's also the safety factor, again, like Leticia talked about. And for me, I'm in the South. So there are still places in Arkansas that as a Black woman, I will not go by myself. And it's my job to go to these places, but I always have to make sure that there are other people with me when I go to those places. So creating safe places that people want to go out and hunt and fish, because we have so many vast resources out there, but what are we doing to advertise that we're making these places safe for people? And I think that when we get over that hurdle, we can really expand and expound upon engaging people more in the outdoors.
So that is fantastic. And you've given me just so many materials to use as a launch pad. We're going to have a fantastic conversation. And Holly and Chris, I want you to tackle it. So Lizandra was able to tackle this from the perspective of Arkansas, right? And I would love to hear from your perspective here in Connecticut. Holly first, and you, Chris, you know, how are we actually taking on, perhaps as Lizandra sort of mentioned, as an auxiliary to our job description, that kind of engagement for adults to get them involved. Holly, I can think of programs and food justice like the Green Village Initiative down in Bridgeport, Love Fed in New Haven, food justice programs in Hartford. I can think of those sorts of programming, but tell me, you know, how effective are they, and what's our responsibility for that kind of engagement?
Sure, thanks, Marcy. You know, I think the biggest barrier specifically for working lands in Connecticut is access and affordability, especially for, you know, first generation farmers. You brought up a lot of great programs in the state that sort of act as incubator programs. You know, Knox is another great one that provides training for farmers in urban settings. But then you have the question of, you know, how do those folks graduate from that and find secure land tenure, buy their own piece of land to establish their business that they've now been trained on? Connecticut specifically is a difficult state because it is so densely populated. Land prices are extremely high. And there's also demand for open land from non-ag sources, commercial development, residential development, recently solar development. So, you know, these first generation farmers are competing with, you know, much more lucrative endeavors to try and purchase these pieces of farmland. So the focus, I think, really has to be, you know, how do we make land access more available and more affordable? And how do we give folks who are just starting out the knowledge to go out there, you know, and find their land?
And Chris, I mean, from your experience here in Connecticut, what are some of the ways we've been engaging both young people, adults, municipalities, schools, you know, communities to really get involved and take advantage of the land?
Yeah. One of the things that was always difficult in my job was to describe urban forestry. And one of the definitions that I like to use, it's trees where we live, work, and play. And so I think that's one of the things that's very helpful in general, is to encourage this understanding that, you know, nature is all around us, whether we're, you know, in downtown Bridgeport somewhere, or whether we're, you know, out in Union, one of the corners of Connecticut. That there's trees around us. There's nature is happening around us, and so encouraging people to get tuned into that wavelength, so to speak, so that they're looking at this natural world and seeing it in, you know, in the tree on their street, which maybe then connects to the tree in the park, which then, you know, kind of, you know, if somebody has not spent a lot of time out in the woods, to have that light bulb go off that, oh, gee, we're surrounded with forests all around us. And so that's one part of it. Another thing that we talk a lot about, and I hope I'm not getting a little too prior technical, but talking about ecosystem services, and how much of what we depend upon depends itself upon, you know, the natural world. So that when you go and you get a glass of water from the tap, that glass of water is there as clean water because you we have so much forest land here in Connecticut. So encouraging people to make those sorts of connections, I think helps build a sense of relationship. That's going to be helpful. I mean, it's only a small step in that direction, but I think that's important. That it's not like they're separate worlds. Okay, we've got these densely populated areas where people drive to work and live in their homes and mow their lawns, and then we have the woods out there. They're all part of one piece.
And I'm interested because, before we move on to the next question, I'm interested in sort of staying there for a bit, Chris, because I think that there is, and you'll certainly say this as growing up in Bridgeport, nature is all around us, can feel to a lot of folks who live in these deeply, densely populated urban centers. We think of Bridgeport, certainly New Haven, Hartford, Waterbury, who sometimes that line can feel like a consolation prize where nature is all around us, right? You can see our green parks and our trees, right? But when you go out to the adjacent sort of more rural towns, they get the real nature and we get the sort of consolation prize. Have you seen that kind of dichotomy come up in your work? And for sure, any of the other panelists, if you've seen that as well, please chime in.
Just to follow up quickly, then I'll turn over to Letitia. Yes, of course. And there is this legacy of the industrial past and pollution. And so, to some extent, it's the overused, abused nature that, that is what is in our cities. And it's part of, those of us in environmental careers, one of the things we pay a lot of attention to. So I think that's a very good point to make, Mercy. But the other side of what I was trying to say is that, if people feel they have a connection to the forests, for instance, that are outside the city, then they also have a right to be there, to visit, to feel that it's theirs as much as anybody else's.
Letitia, thank you for that. Letitia, did you have something you wanted to add there?
Yeah, I wanted to add a couple things about systemic racism and unintended exclusion or unintended bias. To me, it's about education and exposure as a cross mechanism. So oftentimes I work with conservationists, which are very often white conservationists. In fact, most of the time when I'm in a room, it's me and one other person of color. This is the life that I live. And generally we've been invited just because of that. And I think that it's critical to think about this, that if you live in Hartford, Bridgeport, or New Haven, and you don't own a car, the closest thing might be a very small park with a couple of trees. And in some cases, those areas are not safe. If you live in, I will use Granby or Fairfield, for example, Granby has so much land trusts. And if you're a child living in Granby, you can literally walk outside and get on a bike path. You could go running. There are so many options for you. If you live in Hartford and you don't have a car, you can't do that to go outside the city to see the forest experience. It's much more difficult to pack a picnic, to bring you stuff that you need to be outdoors when you're riding a bus. These are things that have been missed. I'll give you one more example. Turning Point Park in Hartford, which is not an actual park, but is named Turning Point Park, is a piece of land that's a triangle just outside. It's in the Asylum Ave neighborhood. And it's called Turning Point Park. It's an literal empty piece of land. And all there is grass. There are no bushes, there are no trees, there are no ways to pollinate, there are no paths. This is called a park. So I bring that forward because it would make you assume that there were options when there are not in those areas. I think it's critical also to talk about exclusionary practices in relationship to funding for those parks. If you look at Salmon Brook Park, or if you look at Frog Hollow, all of these places where, parks are supposed to be versus where they really are, shows you immediately on a map that you don't, and even in fact, if you want to read national reports or local reports, people of color have less access to green spaces and higher levels of asthma and respiratory diseases just based on that fact. And I worked at the hospital before I worked as a building scientist or an environmental justice person. And at the hospital, one of the studies that I participated in was a study on Hartford and asthma, which showed that it was directly linked to the lack of access to green space. So I think it's really important that we remember that access means access, and equity requires equitable distribution of resources to allow our communities to set aside land and to develop in ways that are meaningful for our population's health and prosperity. Thank you.
Thanks for that. Tasha, Holly, Lysandra, any points to add to that? If not, we'll head to the chat in just a moment.
Chrissy, just to add one other aspect of this, because we've talked a little bit about education and the importance of education. I think one of the things that's kind of, resonating in the back of my mind, to the question you asked, in some ways, the rules of the woods are different than the rules of the city. And just in, from somebody that, that maybe hasn't spent a lot of time out, on the trails. If you're in the city and a tree falls, well, the city comes and cleans it up. If you're out in the forest, of course, that tree falls, it stays there. And then a whole lot of other creatures come and they make use of that tree. And once, once your mind is open to that sort of thing, like, oh, wow, this is how nature really works. It is, I guess, a different set of rules than most people are thinking in terms of, if they've, thinking in terms of city rules. Well, there's somebody that handles that. There's some person that comes along. Yeah.
And I mean, it sort of leads me to think about my time. I section hike the AT a little bit each year, and there are portions, right, that when you're on the AT kind of veer off and there's a city trail, you can tell when it is an AT maintained trail and then when it is a municipally maintained trail, right? And sometimes the quality of that care is sort of different, and that all goes to show sort of what does that governing body invest in? What do they care about? I'm gonna turn to the chat in just a moment. Amy, I hear that there is a question that we're going to lift up.
Yes, I will run down the chat with a few questions, and also just point everyone out to the fact that there's some good resources also being provided in the chat, some links to more information and some other comments. But I'll run through the questions first, and if we have time, maybe we can run back through to some of the information that's being provided. So this one takes a little bit of a different turn, and it's how are your organizations, agencies working to integrate disability access into your work of promoting equity? Do you have any examples maybe you can share from your respective agencies or organizations around that topic?
I could kind of touch on that a little bit, because part of the environmental permitting means that I'm reviewing the projects that are being constructed. So what we have tried to do at our bank fishing areas that are maintained by Game and Fish is that we put in courtesy docks. Some of those are floating, some of those are fixed, just depending on where they are, because of Corps of Engineers, like we can't have things floating down the river and into a dam. But what we've done is to create those areas to make access easier. So whether you're, wheelchair accessibility, those ramps are wide enough, have railing for safety. So as we're moving forward and doing updates to our areas, and we're making sure that even in our hunting areas on our WMAs, that we're making areas accessible where they're ADA accessible, but they can get in if you got in with a four-wheeler, or you're able to drive in with your vehicle up to a certain point. So we've created those areas for disability access. As we get to our community work, we're going to start working more with our community partners. We have ponds that we stock in the cities, but we don't own those ponds. So Game and Fish just can't go and, tell you what to do with your property. But we are trying to work with our municipal partners to actually increase those accesses at those facilities as well.
I want to follow up and say in Windsor, Connecticut, where I live, we have this beautiful park, Northwest Park. It's huge and gorgeous. And one of the things that they did was created a driveway that led to the to an area that was closer to the trails that are paved. There's a couple trails that are paved, and they put handicap parking right in the area near the trails that have paved, and they marked them clearly on a map. I thought that was a really great expansion of the park there. And I've seen that in other places, but it is really important because oftentimes there aren't anywhere you could use your cane or your wheelchair, also strollers, right? If you're with small children, you would need that same access for strollers as well as for disabled people. So it's a really excellent point that someone made in the chat that we really need to consider if we're excluding our older populations or people who've been injured or have some disabilities.
I should mention too, on Connecticut DEP, the Forest and Park page, they have a whole page that lists accessible state parks, fishing piers and so forth.
Chris, would you be able to drop a link to that? Okay, I see Doris Johnson just dropped into the link. Thank you. Holly, I saw your hand.
Yes, thank you, Mercy. A couple things. So from the Department of Agriculture's perspective, we do provide grant funding to municipalities to improve municipally owned working lands, whether that is just to reclaim certain farmland and make it available to lease to a farmer or improve community garden space. And this past year, we did provide grant funding to a municipality to make their raised garden beds more handicap accessible. So putting down either finely crushed gravel or another material to make wheelchairs accessible in between the rows of raised beds, and then also raising the height of the raised bed so that somebody can more easily access the actual soil. And then putting my DEEP hat on now, former employee of DEEP. The department has a grant program called the Urban Green and Community Garden Grant Program, and that provides funding to municipalities to improve garden space in urban areas. And then looking at the open space and watershed land acquisition program as part of DEEP, there is a certain criteria in the scoring of each application devoted specifically to ADA accessibility. So that's part of, how those projects are evaluated. Is there, like Letitia said, is there handicap parking? Is the access from parking to the trails available? Are the trails open and clear and level? Encouraging land trust to take those things into consideration.
What I love about these conversations is that, it's certainly an offering of information and resources to the folks who are listening. But Letitia's gesture, as you were naming that last couple of resources, I saw Letitia pick up her pen and was like writing down the notes on, what is that grant program from DEEP, right? And so I think that it offers, the folks here that are also committed to continuous learning and improvement in the environmental space, to be able to tap into these resources as well. Amy, I'm kicking it over to you. Do we have another question?
Yeah, I'm going to.
I want to follow up on that 1 second. I apologize. Just one quick follow up there.
Yeah,
I want to bring up the point that Holly made in relationship to that earlier conversation and what is the state of Connecticut or any of the organizations doing to kind of ensure that we break that barrier of the underrepresented populations, which have historically literally not been involved or at the table. And I want to bring forward specifically, Amy, about this program you just mentioned, Urban Green Funding, as an example. But oftentimes as a woman of color who leads a nonprofit that is staffed by women of color 100%, we do apply for programs and these things of this nature, but we are never selected as recipients of the funding. And so, and it's not just me, it's not just my organization, because I did a lot of research on this in the past 2 years during COVID. And in fact, most philanthropic grants that go out to organizations doing conservation go to 99% white-led organizations, which brings forward the idea that even if the funding does exist, if it's only going to municipalities, which again are very white-led entities, Oftentimes that funding never trickles down to the communities that it's intended for. So there has to be some, and I put it in the chat earlier on in the conversation about metrics. How do we move forward in setting meaningful metrics that would encourage actual participation from communities of color, but moreover, ensure that those who are in charge of distributing funding, reviewing applications and such, actually have training to make sure that they're unrecognized internal biases or the structural racism that clearly exists, else we wouldn't be having this conversation, is addressed rather than talked about. Because I've been having these conversations. It wasn't called DEI before. That's a new term. But the same conversation that we're having today, I was having way back in 2009. And so I worry, 15, 20 years later, when we're having the exact same dialogue with the same lack of diversity, how do we actually move this agenda forward versus just discussing it?
Oof. Amy, I almost don't even want to give you the mic to ask the next question because I have one, but I will allow it.
Well, I think you should go right ahead. I'm scanning and there's so much terrific information being placed in here, but no specific questions. So go ahead and I'll keep watching.
So let's dive right into the solutions, right? So we've spent the first portion of this conversation diving into the issues, right? What is the issue of access? What is the issue of equity? What is the issue of quality, right? When we're talking about urban parks, when we're talking about how municipalities have stake in these city parks, these state parks, so on and so forth. So now that we've adequately approached an understanding of the issues, what are some of the solutions we can start thinking about? And Tasha, I'd like to start with you.
All right, so can we not start with me?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Sorry.
Absolutely. Letitia, I'm gonna come to you second, but I would love to hear from Holly or Lysandra, and then Letitia, I'm gonna jump on to your train of thought from there.
So in the state of Arkansas, I'm not sure if every state has this. We're very fortunate that we have an additional 8-cent sales tax that was put into we're constitutionally independent of the state one. So there's an amendment that makes us constitutionally independent. So that's what we are. But then we have another amendment that gives us an 8-cent sales tax, and that's locked in, and that's a conservation tax. We have access to that, but not everybody, because I didn't even know until I started working for Game and Fish, that money is there for educational outreach. But on top of that, the fines that we receive from our enforcement officers for the tickets that they write, based on the county, the revenue from those fines per county is available for schools and groups to tap into to get grants for. So our Archery in Schools program, there's money there for grants for schools to obtain the equipment and the training to have that program launched in their schools. But I didn't know about that. So if I didn't know about it, then how do other people know about it? And that's what we're finding. We're finding the issue is communication. And it's communicated in the areas, again, where people feel comfortable. And it's going to take other staff. I always say that, when I sit in meetings with our directorate, I say, we are ambassadors. We are the ambassadors for our agencies. We're the ambassadors for the things that we want to see. So when we go out and when I have this shirt on with this badge on, I am an ambassador for the Game and Fish, Arkansas Game and Fish Commission. And it is my job that when I see someone who doesn't know, that I take the time to educate them. My husband says I never meet a stranger, but I told him a long time ago, I didn't talk as much as I do now, but my job has propelled me to do that because I have to engage with the public, but I also want to educate people. And every conversation that I have in the public, in the community, when I'm wearing this uniform is my opportunity to engage, to expose people to the things that are available to them, to reach out and say, we've got this program or we have an event and we want you to come. It's having that personal experience with people, whether it's in our churches, whether it's in the grocery store, because I've had people stop me at Home Depot and I've gone into a whole spiel about what the Game and Fish does, because one, they're shocked that they're seeing a woman in a Game and Fish uniform because they think we're all law enforcement, and we're not. You know, there's so many aspects to our agency. And I think part of it, it falls at our feet just as well as it falls at our agencies. Our agencies have, you know, people who are in communications, and that's their job. Their job is to convey what we do. But sometimes they aren't equipped with the proper tools to communicate with the right people, right? So taking that on, I think personally, if everybody took it on as a personal mission, then I think access and information would be more freely available and people would know. But people can't access what they don't know. And I think that's like the biggest thing. Like I said, for us, we have revenue, we have things that we can do, but now I find that it's my kind of like one of my side jobs, I guess, is to be vocal about those things that are available. Because if we're not, you're right, those predominantly white communities and organizations will have access to things, and we don't have access because we don't know. And that's also by design sometimes, is that if we don't tell them, if we never put it out there, if we keep it hidden, then people don't know. And that's an access to revenue to do projects and engage in communities that need it the most. So sometimes, you know, as they say, closed mouths don't get fed, but you can be fed if you never knew it existed in the first place. So being an ambassador and just putting it out there, even on my personal social media, I make sure that I put information out there about our agency as best I can so that people can see there are things that we can do and engage in. And it doesn't mean that you got to go buy a lot of equipment to do it.
So thank you for that. What I'm hearing, if I were to capture that and do a word cloud, I'm going to say engagement, I'm going to say education, I'm going to say access to information. I'm also going to say visibility and promotion, right? Meeting people where they are, so that they don't have to go out of their way to learn the things that you want them to have access to. What are the other things that we can be doing to resolve some of the issues that we have seen? And let's talk about this from the sense of where you sit in your seat.
I think an area of improvement could be, you know, how grant applications for any program are evaluated, and, you know, what are we asking for? Are we asking for the wrong things in grant applications? Is it just the agency that's reviewing them, or is the public reviewing them? You know, I know there's a big push in the Department of Agriculture right now to have outside review panels, having folks, a diverse group of folks in the public that are also reviewing these applications. Because, you know, I really liked what Lizandra said about, you know, sometimes, you know, as a government official, I'm not in those settings where I'm face to face with folks to share this knowledge or spread this information. And so having, you know, outside folks who are in those communities, who are engaging with folks all across the board and bringing them into the discussion about how do we equitably take this funding that we have and spread it all across the board instead of just sticking to one group, because that's normally the group that we have day-to-day, you know, face-to-face interactions with. I think, you know, we have to get more outreach out to more folks.
Absolutely. I'm hearing outreach, but I'm also hearing something about this, you know, measurable impact in grant making, and then also grant assessments. There, you know, how are we putting our money where our money is, where our mouth is, or where our mouths are, thinking about various agencies, right? If we don't have specific standards of impact written into the grant eligibility or written into what we're looking for in terms of achieving the goals outlined in the grant. So for instance, we can be writing into these grants, well, we want to uplift diverse communities. And as such, we're working with, to Letitia's point, we are highly encouraging organizations led by people of color, organizations led by people from you know, low income backgrounds, led by people who are serving you know, disabled communities, right? Writing that inside of the grant, and it sort of requires us to think about grant making in a different way.
Or having set asides, you know, that's another option, is setting aside a certain amount of, you know, funding I think, I think that's
Absolutely.
another
I'm
key.
gonna piggyback on that, Holly, if you don't mind. Change requires change, right? And like I said, I've been in these rooms for over 15 years listening to this exact same discussion. Why are people of color underrepresented in the movement on climate change, conservation, all of the things that we're talking about? Why are we underrepresented as farmers or as business owners or as homeowners? And the ultimate answer is what Lysandra said, and that is that we're unaware of the processes and procedures on how to obtain those things. And then even if we are aware, by chance, like someone like Doris might send something out to us, being a person of color, thinking of others of color, even then, those who are the reviewers or the creators of the RFPs are going to set it up in a way where it requires a master's or a PhD or at a minimum at a bachelor's degree, right? And unfortunately, people of color are less likely to complete a bachelor's degree. The other thing is that there's no intentional outreach to communities of color. No one's going there and making those intentional connections. There's no meaningful partnerships. We're often offered the opportunity to participate as a token, as in after the plan's been made, we're there for the picture, or we can be a rubber stamp on the policy, but we can't actually participate in the drafting or allocation of any resources to our own communities. One way to address that would be for folks who already have resources, and there's many here today, to create meaningful relationships with people who have similar goals, but lack funding and resources, who have connections to the communities that they're remiss in connecting with, but don't have the resources to help those communities and to lift them. Another one is to set a specific metric, such as 25% representation on your board, trust, in your funding metrics, because if our state is 10% African-American, 17% Latino, I imagine, with not even counting Asian and Pacificers who are Caribbean descent, or those who are from, certain areas that are considered minorities, we could certainly find 25%, but instead we accept the one Black person and the one Latino, or in some cases, the one Black person and the no Latino or Latina, no Asian Island Pacificers as well. And then the last is that we must be treated as equals. This is to say that DEI training is critical. Diversity, equity, inclusion training specifically provided by a person of color for those who are drafting or who are decision makers should be a requirement of anyone who will draft or review funding allocations, policies, procedures, or laws for the state of Connecticut specifically, because we also have a tax in Connecticut, Lysandra. Ours is for the Connecticut Green Bank, and they can do whatever they want with that money as a quasi entity. But we're very underrepresented in the benefits from that program, despite the fact that we're required to pay into it, just like this program where you are. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Letitia. Tasha, can I come back to you and Chris?
Sure. So can you go to Chris first? Sorry.
Yeah, no worries. Chris, let's hear it.
Okay. I'm going to steer a little bit away from grants, just because I have a lengthy background of working in grant programs. But one of the reasons, I guess, why I got onto this panel to begin with, one of the objections I raised in these discussions that we're having about, because there's been a lot of discussion about equity and anti-racism in, the forest sector, so to speak. And oftentimes the resolution of the discussion was, well, we have urban forestry, so that people of color have urban trees, and and I would just silently scream, when I heard that, that line of discussion get developed, because of course, that does not solve the problem at all. So I was thinking of this question that you raised just a second ago about, well, so what do we do? And so of course, looking at it from my white perspective, which obviously doesn't perceive the problem really in the same way as someone who one of the first things I thought was, gee, it would be great if every time you went into the woods, you had Neil deGrasse Tyson talking about some aspect of the forest. I think a lot of people's concepts of you know, who should be in the woods would change pretty rapidly if you had somebody that authoritative, you know, that knowledgeable, who was there, who knew an awful lot about what's going on out here than I do. So I look at Tasha and Lysandra and I say, yeah, we have you guys. And I think that's very, very important. You know, if, you know, as Letitia just said, you know, if you want change, you have to change. You have to see for yourself. So I think that's the other thing that's important. And I think it's happening more and more. And certainly the pandemic helped encourage people to get out to their state parks, to explore what they have available to them. And this is all people, you know, people from a wide variety of backgrounds. And that changes the perception of everybody else who's out there in the woods. Who says, oh yeah, this isn't just a place for me. This is a place for everybody. And for those of us that like using the woods and kind of like a lot of the peace and quiet, we lost a little bit of that, but there's a lot gained, you know, in seeing that happen. And then of course, the other thing that we've been talking about is, you know, it's the next generation that's coming along. Oh, the other thing I want to add in that is there's also an economic aspect of this too.
Of course.
The part of the perception of, you know, the rural woods, you know, more often than not is where you'll encounter white people. That includes in working in the woods. We're a small state. There's no reason why somebody, you know, wouldn't be able to drive 30 or 40 miles to a good job. So we need to change our views of really what is our, you know, the potential labor pool for, you know, a lot of the work that gets done in the woods. And so I think that's another opportunity that is out there for us.
And I just love this, and it's going to help me transition over to this question about land trust. I just want to do a sound check. Can everyone hear me clearly? Because I'm getting a bit of a buzz. Okay, fantastic. You know, it helps me transition into this conversation about land trust. And one of the things I wanted to talk about is something a topic we've sort of been flirting around a bit. And is anyone else hearing that buzz at all? You are?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, wondering if you should try speaking with everyone muted first before you try changing your own sound system.
Great, thank you. So Chris and Tasha, would you, and as well as Lysandra, would you mind putting mute on just a moment? I hear that going out so far. Okay, I'm not hearing it anymore. Chris, if you can go ahead and put your mute on, that'd be fantastic. So a bit of an issue that we are flirting with, sort of dancing around and haven't really hit the nail on just yet is this inner locus of control and outer locus of control, right? Lysandra, to borrow the phrase that you said earlier, closed mouths don't get fed, which is you appropriately juxtapose with, yeah, but they don't know that there's an option for food, right? And so I think that in so much of my work takes some of these issues out of independent responsibility to a macro level of responsibility, right? And so the question I want to dive into is, you know, what can land trusts do to make their publicly accessible lands more welcoming to more people, right? Because it's not quite just people don't know or people aren't coming. It's a little bit about, you know, what can these land trusts physically do on the policy side or on the practice side, at the day-to-day level? What can they be doing to make their lands far more accessible? Chris, because you touched on that just now, I'll start with you. There you are.
Okay, there we go. I think going in groups, having, you know, the social aspect, I think that's what I'm trying to say, is very important. That certainly if you ask most property owners, would they promote diversity of users of their properties? They would say, oh, of course, of course. So it's not, it's not something that's overtly limiting from, the land trust itself side. I think it's more people not necessarily feeling encouraged to make use of these lands. And if you put that on the individual, like, oh, okay, so I'm going to go where I don't necessarily, not really sure if I, fit in there. That's a difficult proposition. But if you have, I don't know if I'm going to sound out of my generation. If you have a meetup at a, at a land trust property, it will help change perceptions, and because a lot of what we're talking about are perceptions.
Tasha, so Holly, excuse me for just a moment. I want to dive into this question of perception that Chris brought up that I think is a fantastic one, but I think I want to direct it to some of the women of color on the call. So this is a Lizandra, Tasha, Letitia sort of question that Chris brings up that I think is an interesting one for us to dissect a bit, right? Is it, how much does perception play into this? Chris brings up this really good concept of perception. Tasha, do you want me to start with you? I can kick it over to Lizandra and Letitia. Let me ask if you have a frame of reference there.
Start with Letitia, and I promise I will jump in.
Okay, sounds good. It also seems like it's your audio that's causing a bit of the recall back. And so, Lizandra, let's kick off with you.
Tell me the question again, because I'm processing several thoughts, so I want to make sure I hit them.
Yeah, absolutely. So Chris brings up this concept of perception, that some of this is a matter of perception, and I want to hear your thoughts on that.
So it is, because if I want to be honest, I do more outdoor stuff now that I work for an agency, that this is what we do, more so than I did in my college years. Because majority of the people I was in college with, nobody was going camping. Nobody was going fishing or hiking. Those are things that I've gotten into as I've gotten older. And some of those reasons that I got into those things was because my child went to the school she went to, and they engaged in those things. And the church community that we got involved in when we moved from Pine Bluff to Little Rock was engaged in those things. First time my daughter ever went camping, I mean, I went as a Girl Scout, but outside of that, I hadn't been since I was like 9. So here I am, 30 years old, camping out in the woods, floating the river. All those things have been accessible to me for years, but they weren't things that people within my community did. So, now I'm like, we need to go float the buffalo because that was really fun and cool. And I have friends now that want to do that because one, they trust me because they're like, you want us to do what? There's that level of comfort, and it's a perception. And if I don't see someone else engaging in those activities, I'm not going to partake in them. And when you talk about agencies and put it out there, it means engaging with groups of people that are not comfortable. They don't engage in these things because of comfort. It's perception of that's not what we do in our culture. That's we go over here, we go to the park. We're not going to float no rivers. I don't know what a canoe is. I don't know what a kayak is. That looks like a lot of work. So, those are those perceptions when you have people from the city that are like, why would I do that? But that's where we can be agents of change, I think. But yeah, that perception is there, and it is limiting. It's a limiting factor that we put on ourselves in general when we don't really have to. But I think that is the biggest thing, is not seeing people who are around you doing those activities.
And Alter Afro has this saying that they use when they promote events is like Black people do. And you can put the verb after it, any verb, bike, swim, Black people do climb, right? And And that all goes to Chris's point on perception, right? Once you're able to change the narrative or the perception of what you are allowed to and to not do, then you might engage in it more readily. Letitia, is that how you feel?
Yeah, in relationship to your direct question, I think land trusts can create intentional plans to recruit diverse board members, intern staff, invite community members to use the land by reaching out to minority-led nonprofits. I loved Chris's idea of specifically inviting them to utilize the park for things that they would do anyways naturally, but providing things like maybe a tent they could use under a pergola. I just went to a park in Manchester, Connecticut that had a really great outdoor space with a sound garden and a smell garden, activities for their children to do, fishing, hiking, climbing, monkey bars, so that their kids can be involved with them as well. I think that events should also be offered by land organizations and by our state entities, such as hands-on activities like planting seeds, coloring books about trees and farming, educational takeaways, which say all are welcome here. Also, they could put up art in the parks that reflect people of color participating in activities, or actual photos of people utilizing that land so that they feel welcome. When they see representation that looks like them, it opens the door to them entering that space. Signs that say all are welcome here. We already talked about the walkers' canes, and that park should also be aptly named after people of color instead of always naming them after white donors, because so often I go to a park that's located right in the city, but it's named after someone that doesn't look anything like the people from that community. That's off the top. And the last thing I want to say is that I think it's critical that people recognize that on more than one occasion, and I'll use myself as an example, my children are Afro-Latino, and we'll be walking and someone will come up to my son, who's a big Black boy, and say, "Are you lost?" And he's a couple feet ahead of us. Are you lost? Are you from this community? Do you need, and that's real. That's happening right here in Connecticut. But you don't feel welcomed when that happens. You feel like you're out of place because they're asking you if you're lost. So they're assuming that you're not meant to be there. And I've experienced that in multiple locations here in our state, but in Vermont, which is a green state, which Holly mentioned she was from, and I love to travel there. All these years we've traveled and done caving and hiking and, immersion in nature for our children to help them feel comfortable and not afraid. We went recently and we experienced a horrific, like a verbal altercation with somebody who basically was calling us the N-word. So I think that when people who are allies from those communities who really have their hearts in this game and are working to diversify, it's critical that when you see something like that or you hear of it, that you address it, with your municipality, with your friends, with your cohorts, to ensure that you're going to look out for that and not allow that in your community, that your community is better than that. And so I think it's something that we can all do actively to be protective of the diverse nature of our state by inviting others who don't look like us to participate, and staying and hanging with them and introducing them to the activities that you so much love. Like, you're the great representation of why nature's so great, because you already love it. And like Lysandra said, you can bring others to the table to have that same joy for the beautiful things that are good for them, and good for all of us, really.
And one other thing I'd like to kind of drop in there. The other thing that makes people feel welcoming is when if English is not their first language, is seeing that there are signs and there's advertisement that is in a language that I'm comfortable with and I understand. I think when that happens, people feel included, because we have in the northwest part of our state, we have a huge Hispanic population, but majority of our things our signs aren't in Spanish. Our literature isn't in Spanish. We are just now, and I'm going into my 5th year, and we've talked about this for 4 years. We are just now getting to the point we're like, oh, well, we need to get these things translated. Well, that should have been done a while ago, because we're missing out on a huge population of people who don't know or have access to our resources. We just built a multi-million-dollar nature center in that area, and majority of the signs are not in Spanish. So we do a disservice to people as well when they don't feel comfortable, because some can't even understand the services that we're offering. So being bilingual and in the areas where we can, that I think also can change the perception and develop a welcoming environment as well.
Absolutely. And that sort of omission, and intentional or otherwise, Tasha, can I just have you mute your mic again? It sounds like we're having I think the feedback coming. So that kind of intentional omission actually leads folks to say, right, I might be a native Spanish speaker who can read English, but what ends up happening is you are saying as a decision maker that this is not where you want to put your dollars, right? You don't want to put your dollars in places that invest in a welcoming, right, atmosphere in the outdoors. Holly, I'm going to you because I'm interested in, right, when we're talking about the landscape of agriculture and what land trust can be doing, right? Letitia said the sentence, like planting seeds, right? Planting the physical seeds of interest in land cultivation. Can you tell us what land trust can be doing to encourage that kind of engagement?
Yeah, of course. Thank you. The biggest thing obviously is make your cropland open and available to farming. And not just, a lot of times what I see is a land trust that says, yeah, we have this hayfield and we let this, large dairy farm down the road, hay the field. And so that's great. We're making our land available for agriculture. But what about, the new and beginning farmer in your community who's really trying to establish their business and get started and wants to maybe grow row crops? And I think a lot of that stems from this disconnect between, conservation values that a land trust holds and their idea that many types of agriculture are not compatible with those conservation values. And I just flatly don't think that's true. And so I think there needs to be more conversation with agricultural producers and as a land trust in your area to see, how can we make these compatible? And I will say, it is difficult. There are a lot of agricultural producers who need more than just land too. They need a hoop house, they need a shed to keep their equipment in, they need affordable housing opportunities nearby. But there are some really shining examples of land trusts who are, sort of meeting that ask. For example, the Cheshire Land Trust purchased a farm property in town and has made that property available to a family to lease for a vegetable operation. The town of Simsbury owns farmland property that they have a long-term lease with a farmer. So I think it's important for land trusts. Thank you, Maddie, in the chat, East Granby Land Trust. So, I think there's a lot of opportunity for land trusts to look just beyond those sort of raw landscapes and look at working lands as part of their portfolio as well. Because, affordability and accessibility is, the number one barrier for new and beginning farmers. So if land trusts can use their resources to help purchase some of these properties and then in turn make them available, I think it could make a huge difference.
Thanks for that. And before we head to the chat to close out with some of the questions there, Chris and Tasha would love to hear some final words on what you think land trust can be doing.
Hi. So I'd like to go back to what Leticia said about land trust hiring and making a pipeline for internships for minorities to give them a place to speak about nature and giving them a place to be represented. And so when other minorities go to land trust, they see other minorities there and it makes them feel comfortable. So I think having a pipeline of like mentors and people to on the boards of those land trusts and things like that, when they're making really big decisions, to have people of color on those boards as well.
Fantastic. Chris, final words on that?
Um, Not having a lot to say about land trust, just one other thought to kind of put out there. One of the things I find in nature is you kind of step out of the present day. You step into time in a bigger sense. And one of the things, particularly as you get to read the land better, is you realize that a lot of things have happened here over many, many years. And so what you see here today is not necessarily, or what you're feeling here today is not necessarily the way things are going to be in the future. It's a good place to dream about better things to come.
Absolutely. And, you know, that is what nature teaches us, that better things are to come if you sow the land and cultivate the land appropriately. Amy, I'm going to kick it to you for any remaining questions in the chat, and I'll invite our viewers to drop any questions that you might have there in the chat for us to tackle before we run out of time.
Again, I'm not seeing any questions. Sylvie, please jump in if you do see some questions that I haven't hit yet, but there's just so many tremendous and very positive responses and suggestions on things that can be done and things that are already being done. And there are many things land trusts can do, from promotion and outreach to creating greater accessibility, but one basic is becoming less no-oriented, as in signage, and other kinds of documentation that is prohibition heavy. This is something that Avalonia Land Conservancy is working to correct. There were several comments around transportation, which I think is a theme that's emerged from today's conversation around, you know, one of the barriers is getting people to the land. And I think, you know, with a lot of land trusts that we've been working with out in the field, it's talking about bringing things to the communities, you know, asking the communities what they need, and forgetting somewhat about bringing people to your land and getting people on the land and saying, hey, you know, we're the land trust, come to us, it's going to them, and saying, what can we do to help you, and listening to their ideas and then coming up with some solutions together. Lots of, again, I'm scrolling down here, lots of terrific resources as well. It's 1:28, so we always end on time, and I want to make sure that we do today. But there's also a laundry list of land trusts that are being presented here that are already doing some work with farmers and farmland, and I would encourage land trusts to take a look at that, and also contact Connecticut Farmland Trust and FarmLink, of course, the Department of Agriculture and Holly, to when looking at their land that might have some accessible farmland, to think about how they may be able to use it a little bit more, just use it differently, and offer it up a little bit more. So I'm going to turn it back to you, Mercy, before I just quickly close it out with some announcements. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And thank you to all our panelists who had amazing things to add to this conversation. And if we can offer just 5 seconds a person to give us who is missing from this conversation, so that we can root ourselves in the next steps to ensure that we're including them as we move forward. So Holly, who's missing from this conversation?
Farmers are missing from the conversation.
Farmers, fantastic.
Especially,
Lysandra.
yeah, especially BIPOC farmers and first generation farmers.
I think from my end, I think from a state government standpoint, it's our leadership. Because no matter how much the staff sees there's an issue, until there's change in your leadership, and we're governed by our commission, until the changes that we want to see in the public are reflected on our commissions, which are appointed by the governor and our directorate, I think they need to be in the conversation so they really hear where the issues are.
Fantastic. Chris, who's missing?
Oh, I'm thinking there's a great number of people that just don't get this nature thing. And yeah, we need to continue to reach those people.
Fantastic. Tasha, who's missing from the conversation? You're muted. You're still muted.
Sorry. I'd like to see grassroots partnerships with federal agencies like my own to get back into the community and be connected to nature.
Fantastic. And Leticia, I absolutely want to hear from you to close us out. 7 seconds. Who is missing from this conversation?
Well, evidently, the only Latina in the room. I don't see any Latinos. So I feel like we're underrepresented. I don't see Asian Island Pacificers in the room. Ultimately, the state of Connecticut does have an actual legal definition of what minorities are. And I always tell people that when you're dropping into chats like, well, our land trust is renting out farmland, we're doing this or that, is to take it back to yourself and set those metrics for your land trust and say, how many of those renters are people of color? And also someone mentioned real in the chat also that, they're worried about bringing people of color to the conversation because we haven't dealt with equity and pay and other things for white women. We need our chance to be at the discussion and to represent our own views and concerns about that. If we're not there, we're not meaningfully engaged. If you don't see us, we're not participating. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And thank you to all of the panelists here today. Amy, I am kicking it back over to you in the studio.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. What an interesting conversation and so insightful. I'm really grateful for all of you for coming to join us today and sharing your very candid insights and perspectives around land conservation and equitable access to the outdoors. Mercy, thank you so much for your tremendous facilitation. We look forward to hearing some of your new programs come out and following along with you as we take this journey together. And to all of you out there who I can't see because your videos are off, turn on your videos, come on in the room. Thank you all so much for coming today. This is the third session, as I said, and we're really grateful for your being here. Tomorrow, we will be talking about education, which again, a lot of these topics were mentioned today. Tomorrow, we're going to dive into it a little bit more. And then Thursday, we're going to round the conference out with a chat about climate. So please join us for those sessions as well. And all of you again, thank you so much and have a great day.